I said it to the Ukrainians, do you really want to be the Afghanistan of Europe? And I would say to the Taiwanese, do you really want to be the Ukrainians of East Asia? The answer is absolutely no. Be careful. Be careful. The United States cannot save you. In fact, all it can do is get you destroyed because Taiwan will be safe and secure if the United States stops its provocations. This is the irony of the whole situation.
Hello, everybody. This is Pascal from Neutrality Studies, and today I'm hosting a panel to discuss the unfinished Chinese Civil War, or the cross-strait conflict, as it is now called. And I'm referring, of course, to the unsettled dispute between mainland China, governed by the People's Republic of China, the PRC, from Beijing, and the Taiwanese islands, governed by the Republic of China, the ROC, from Taipei. To discuss this, I have two great experts with me, one from Taipei and one sitting in the United States. The first one is Dr. Joanna Lei, a scholar, businesswoman, US media executive, and former senator in the Republic of China Parliament. And the other one is the very famous and always brilliant Dr. Jeffrey Sachs, an economics professor at Columbia University with decades of experience in US foreign policy. Both of you, welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be with both of you.
Thank you.
Dr. Lei, maybe let's start with you. You were a lawmaker in Taiwan. You're currently in Taipei, and you are also a critic of US meddling in Chinese internal affairs or in Taiwanese affairs, particularly. Could you maybe lay out what you see as one of the main problems at the moment that is fueling the conflict between Beijing and Taipei?
Thank you. I'm humbled in front of Jeffrey Sachs, so I'll try to be succinct. I'd like to make 3 points. One is, Pascal, you were exactly right that the nature of the cross-strait relation is a civil war, is an unfinished war, unfinished business. And it should be determined by people and government across the Taiwan Strait. But we have seen there were a lot of ideas about Taiwan being an independent, quote unquote, country and deserve to be independent outside of the PRC control. However, my view is there is no difference between us, the situation across Taiwan Strait, and the situation between the East and West Germany before their eventual unification in 1990s. And then the second thing is the United States has played a role in China's affairs in terms of Taiwan, not recently. It goes back to 1832, when the US Maritime forces have been in the West Pacific. And in fact, the United States have tried to use Taiwan as a springboard or bridgehead to control China's southeast provinces and the waterways. In 1850 to 1870, there were different proposals. So today, the situation in Taiwan, I think, is in terms of geopolitical situation, it's just as in the 1830s or 1850s. That is, Taiwan is a very easy chess piece for the United States to make sure that its potential conflict or confrontation with China has a springboard or a bridgehead, and therefore we are being earmarked or designated as a potential flashpoint. However, there is no real promise of US supporting Taiwan's security. So all the things that current DPP is telling the people that the United States will support us, will defend us, it's blatantly incorrect because there is no joint defense treaty. There is no MAC, which is the Military Assistance Advisory Group that was in Taiwan until 1979, when the diplomatic tie was severed. So in terms of the future, in terms of US continued involvement in Taiwan, I think there were two things. That's my third point. Biden's promise to defend Taiwan comes with a price that Taiwan simply cannot afford. There's no US military assistance. There's no joint operability between the two forces. And in fact, they have delayed in deliver any armaments to Taiwan, even with the ones we have paid for. and there's no strategic depth in Taiwan. Should there be a confrontational military situation, there is no strategic depth, and we have very low overall resilience. So Taiwan cannot afford to go into war, and which is now being touted as an eventuality or possibility by a lot of American scholars or commentators. And I think that's extremely terrible. And the final point I'd like to make is Biden has propelled Taiwan as a model democracy, a value partner in the West Pacific. However, the DPP is not what they have touted for. In the third term or the second term, in Tsai Ing-wen's term, DPP has a supermajority in Congress. As such, they have passed a series of targeted bills of attainder that allow them to, A, rescind news channels licenses and therefore stamp on the freedom of speech. They have also canceled over 100 political parties, over 40 political associations registration with the Internal Affairs Department. Thirdly, they have incarcerated political dissidents and political party leaders. Even today, they have incarcerated, which is before they were sentenced to be guilty, they have incarcerated the opposition party, the number 3 party leader, Ke Wen-je, to yet again back to before he was even tried. And the last one is they have confiscated KMT's party assets, as well as deemed a lot of KMT affiliates to be special relationship with KMT and confiscated their assets as well. So you can see that the sort of model value partner by DPP, which the Biden administration used as a reason to defend Taiwan, is but a facade or a movie theater. It's a very nice facade, but if you pierce into it, you can see why we have so many silent cries in Taiwan. And our legislative branch has no real power to check and balance the abuse of power by the executive branch or by the president.
For everybody, like the DPP is the currently ruling party that is now has a third term under a new president, and the KMT is the nationalist party, the biggest opposition party. And Jeffrey, we were speaking just before that Taiwan to us looks a lot like a little Ukraine in the Pacific, something that is carved out as a next proxy war. Are you sharing that fear? And what is your views on the development of the speeches, the speech acts that are coming from Washington at the moment?
Thank you very much. I agree with everything Dr. Lei just said. Basically, the U.S. uses Taiwan in the same way that the U.S. has used Ukraine. And I said to Ukrainians several years ago, don't let the U.S. use you. You'll end up destroyed. And I say the same to my many friends in Taiwan. Don't let the U.S. use you. The United States government, the security state, first of all, doesn't care about Taiwan. I'm sorry to say it. It cares about its competition with mainland China. And Taiwan is a piece of a game. Second, I use the phrase game because the people who lead the United States, in my view, are maniacs. They're irresponsible. They think that this is a game. They play a game. Who's on top? Who's number one? Who's got credibility? Who can use reputational force? Who can deploy which instruments? But who suffers are the people on the ground. Ukrainians have lost perhaps 600 or 700,000 dead, and hundreds of thousands wounded. And they're losing on the battlefield because of the game that the United States started to play 30 years ago. Now, that was literally a game, I would say, because when it comes to Ukraine, Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1997, a game player of statecraft, wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard, a game. And he gamed out what it would mean for the United States to expand NATO to Ukraine over Russia's opposition. And he reached the conclusion in 1997, well, Russia could not resist. It has no option. It would have to accede. It was wrong. In other words, it was a bad move. If this were a chess game, okay, he would have lost the chess game. But what he set in motion, he and his colleagues, was not a game, but a real-life disaster. The United States would provoke. The United States would move its military eastward. The United States would ignore all of Russia's red lines. But all would be fine, said Brzezinski, because Russia would have no alternative. One of the things he actually wrote in 1997 is that Russia would never end up siding with China, for example. Okay, he made many, many mistakes, as chess players do. But what resulted was a disaster. Now, the United States is doing the same with Taiwan. The United States has a grand strategy, if one could call it that, although there's nothing grand about it and there's nothing wise about it, so I don't view it as very great strategy. But the U.S. grand strategy is to be number one. And it's to be number one in all parts of the world, including in Asia. I mean, how dare China think itself number one in Asia? The United States is number one in Asia across the Pacific. The whole thing is an absurdity. But the U.S. grand strategy, therefore, is to contain China, to limit China, to put a stick in the spokes of China's economy so that China stumbles or falls into crisis. And it's in that context that Taiwan plays the role in the U.S. game, because the idea is bother China, badger China, weaken China, scare China, divert China. And from a purely military point of view, according to a concept that goes back to one of our most dreadful secretaries of state in our history, John Foster Dulles, if Taiwan is controlled, then the first island chain is controlled, and China cannot project its power into the Pacific. And so there's a strategic element of this. We must control Taiwan. There's a problem, though. Taiwan is not America. Taiwan is not an independent country. Taiwan, according to both the PRC and the ROC, is part of one China. And the United States absolutely is provoking. It's meddling. It's unilaterally sending weapons by the billions of dollars now to Taiwan, as if the PRC would say, well, we're going to send weapons to Mexico because not to Mexico, to Texas, I meant, because we don't like the situation between Texas and the rest of the United States. It's mind-boggling. The United States should not be sending billions of dollars of weapons to a part of a country that it doesn't even have diplomatic relations with, because in 1979, the United States said there is one China, that is our policy, and there is one government that represents China vis-a-vis our relations, and that is the People's Republic of China. All of this is to say, the U.S. is playing a game. It's a dreadfully dangerous, misguided game. I hope people in Taiwan understand. My God, I said it to the Ukrainians, do you really want to be the Afghanistan of Europe? And I would say to the Taiwanese, do you really want to be the Ukrainians of East Asia? The answer is absolutely no. Be careful. Be careful. The United States cannot save you. In fact, all it can do is get you destroyed, because Taiwan will be safe and secure if the United States stops its provocations. This is the irony of the whole situation. Ukraine never had to be destroyed the way it is, and Taiwan can remain safe because mature, grown-up people across the straits on both sides have reached a consensus in the past and can reach a consensus going forward on peace, between the two sides. These are two very mature places. These are two places of a shared history and culture, and both need and want peace. And if the United States doesn't put its nose into it, peace actually will prevail across the straits.
Yeah, and let me ask about this, Joanna. Like the fact of the matter is that China is Taiwan's largest trading partner. The fact of the matter is that the Taiwanese government is called the Republic of China because it itself recognizes itself as a China, right? We have de facto two Chinese governments, right? We have a disagreement of who is the legitimate government. You have a disagreement of how to go forward, but how do you see the forces inside the Taiwanese body politic, the ROC body politic, acting with China, with the United States? Because we know that a majority of Taiwanese citizens is actually for the status quo. They don't want independence, they don't want reunification, they want status quo. What are your thoughts?
Exactly. So let me define what status quo is. I am 66 years old. The last time there were bombs fell on Kinmen was 66 years ago. So I recall, Pascal, you said once that we are de jure at war, but de facto in peace. And that's the status quo of Taiwan. We have managed, even right after the last war in Kinmen, we have managed to stay out of each other and a status quo, which is a relative peace. And also in 2005, I was part of the envoy with Mr. Lian Zhan to visit Beijing with Hu Jintao. After the first time, the leaders of KMT and Communist Party in China shook hands, we actually had 8 years of relative peace with people discussing in terms of practical matters and resolving those, signing agreements with 22 government-to-government meetings, signing about 32 different agreements. So we were entirely possible and capable of resolving our issues with the leaders across Taiwan Straits, like Jeff was saying. But the turning point was really the last two DPP leaders, starting from Tsai Ing-wen in 2016 to Lai Ching-te in 2024. They have, I think, with the encouragement of the United States, pushed an extremist separatist agenda, which is Taiwan independence. And when they push that agenda, which wants to separate Taiwan from the overall concept of China, then PRC has drawn one after another red line, extremely clear red line with their internal laws, such as anti-succession law and so on and so forth. And they actually laid out 3 conditions that there would be military confrontation. One is there's no hope for eventual unification. Secondly, there is international involvement, which is what Jeff was saying, international involvement in the Taiwan situation. In my view, such as if US sent a lot of military armaments or servicemen or another military advisory group to Taiwan, and that would constitute the second one. And the third one is there were no possibility and there is a strong push of Taiwan independence. So all 3 has a strong warning sign laid out for people in Taiwan. So if we are really looking at status quo, in the most recent election, DPP won 40% of the 70% of the people who voted. So you can use the broadest number. 28% of the people in Taiwan supported DPP, which is Lai Ching-te. And even smaller numbers supported his extreme separatist position. So less than 28%, I think the ones who support his extremist position is less than 10%. Unfortunately, our system, our structure, doesn't give us ability to check and balance the executive branch. We have 5 branches of government. If someone wins the presidency, they will control the executive branch. The control yuan, which is a sort of quasi-legal judicial, the judicial branch, because they have nomination right of all the Supreme Court justices, and also the ability to use their ability to have bureaucrats to select and use bureaucrats. So that's the 4th yuan. But the only branch, which is legislative branch, has no ability to come to check and balance the other four branches. Our legislative yuan doesn't have the true power of the purse string. We approve the budget, but we cannot give the authorization of using the money. We don't have investigation rights. We don't have congressional hearing. We cannot hold people contempt of the Congress. So we have very handicapped legislative branch that will have no ability to balance whatever the executive branch leader wants to do. And that is a very real situation of our inability to fight letting this DPP separatist agenda. He can say anything in January 1st, May 20th, which is his inauguration date, and October 10th, which is our National Day. All three speeches send extremely strong signals to PRC, and PRC will interpret his three speeches and decide what they would do to Taiwan.
Jeff, when you hear this, I mean, do you know anything about the way that the United States government, the Biden administration, the incoming Trump administration are officially or unofficially liaising with the DPP? I mean, there is a representative office, right, of Taiwan in Washington, a de facto embassy. Even not although not the jure, I was there once. A beautiful building because it used to be the Chinese, the Chinese embassy, right?
Yeah, it's the
It's huge. But how do you think behind the scenes the liaising is happening at the moment?
Well, they don't need the building in Washington for liaising. They have plenty of ways to liaise. And this is a relationship of the deep state. That is the intelligence security services, the Pentagon, the military, the national security agencies, the NSC and the White House. This is strategic from the U.S. point of view. I can only say to the Taiwanese friends again, remember the adage of Henry Kissinger, to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, to be a friend is fatal. And what Kissinger meant is you get too close to the US and all its glib promises and you get destroyed. And the United States has done this repeatedly. Just cozy up to us, we've got your back. And the country ends up destroyed. And so please, Taiwanese friends, look at a map, look at the breadth of the Pacific, understand what the US government has been doing. It's not one person or another. This goes back actually all to the 1950s. I mentioned John Foster Dulles, but it also is an active policy since Obama, Trump 1, Biden, and it will remain Trump 2. It's not even about Taiwan. The US policy is about China. When China became as successful as it has been, which in my view is a great tribute to the people of China and a great benefit for the world, by the way, because it is wonderful when a great civilization of 1.4 billion people achieves economic success and advancement of technology and is able to benefit and share that with the rest of the world through international trade and finance and investment. This is a good thing, not a bad thing. But in the US point of view, where there are winners and losers rather than people who benefit from a higher living standard, but everything is viewed as us versus them, China's rise became a, quote, bad thing. This is absurd in my view, tragically absurd. Typical, I'm sorry to say it, American stupidity because of the grandiosity of American aspirations to run the world. But when China became successful, as it did, in the 2010s, starting with Obama, mind you, the US policy shifted. We have to stop China's rise. We have to now introduce new trade systems that cut out China. Obama actually had the utterly absurd policy of creating a Trans-Pacific Partnership, which would be a trade relationship across the Pacific with Asia and the US, in which China wouldn't be there, as if you just cross it off the map. This is delusional. It actually didn't happen. It's so delusional, but it was a policy where grown-up people, chronologically grown-up people, said, we'll have a trading system of Asia without China, where China is the #1 trading partner of all the other countries. So this was the first point. Second point, we need to put on sanctions. We need to put on export controls. We need to put on technology controls. Third policy, we need to build up the military strength around China. We need to put new missile systems aimed at China. We need to bolster the militaries in Japan and Korea and Australia, New Zealand. We need the Quad. We need AUKUS. We need, in other words, to aim our military directly at China. Now, it's important to understand, in this context, Taiwan is a piece of this puzzle. Taiwan is not a primary objective of the United States. The objective of the United States is beat China, be #1, keep China down. And Taiwan has its role in all of that. Divide China, weaken China, surround China, build up the military around China. Again, from a military point of view, control Taiwan to limit China's freedom of navigation, its access to the Western Pacific, or its freedom of navigation for its essential sea lanes in the South China Sea, and so forth. And we have people coming into the new Trump administration who write articles and books that China's trying to take over the world. So we absolutely need to confront China, and Taiwan's a critical piece of us confronting China's desire to take over the world. This stuff is like comic books. Yeah, it's like a Hollywood script. China's trying to take over the world. But by the way, the motivation is China's 20% of the world economy. And now Asia is 50%. Well, if China's 20% and we leave it alone, it will control the whole 50%. And then by controlling the whole 50%, it will control 100%. This is more primitive than a bad high school paper, by the way. But this is senior officials of the US government. This is what's called strategic planning, jumping from one absurd proposition to an extrapolation, to an extrapolation, to an extrapolation, until you have a war. And then I would actually ask people to look at a map and read something about the war games. How's a war going to be? First of all, is it going to work for Taiwan? No, not exactly. It's going to destroy Taiwan. How's it going to work for the United States with across thousands of miles of the Pacific with our modern weapon systems, our guided missiles, our anti-naval missile technologies? How's that going to work when it's 90 miles off the coast of mainland China? Well, it's not going to work very well.
But these are the maniacs that we have to deal with, that are actually in power and that do make policy. Joanna, how do you think that Taiwan's pluralistic system and society, do you see hope that this can somehow manage a relationship with China and fend off this push towards the bayonets?
Well, I think the opposition parties have to stand up against the current ruling party to make sure that people's wishes, which is maintenance of status quo, is honored. However, I just want to add a couple of things. When Jeffrey said Taiwan can be this and that, I think Taiwan can be used as one other thing. It's to demonize mainland China. If mainland China does anything to Taiwan in any unfriendly ways, then look, Taiwan is the little rabbit and China is the big bad wolf. And the big bad wolf needs international sanction and needs to be condemned by the Western civilized society and so on and so forth. That's one. There is a new narrative In the past, they kept saying we are the value partner, the best democratic examples in Asia, but they probably realized that the DPP is not neither democratic nor progressive. It is an illiberal democracy in development. So they're adding one more narrative, that is the Taiwan Strait is a very important lifeline. If there should be any problem, then the lifeline for the world economy will be damaged. So it gives another reason for international forces to be involved in Taiwan. So that's one. But I think the more you think about the US overall strategy of not wanting another regional hegemon, which is your friend Mishheimer always used, they don't want any other regional hegemon to rise. It really happens when China started doing One Belt, One Road initiative in Beijing. Obama flew in and tried to stop every other country from joining in because they didn't want to have any other forces. At the same time, China realized that it has to really develop its technology, strengthen its military build out, and so on and so forth. With the imbalance between the military might, especially in the West Pacific, if you look at the repivot to Asia, United States plan to put 60% of its maritime forces in the West Pacific, but it's so much behind what China is building in terms of its maritime forces. Therefore, they have changed in the Biden administration to the two main strategy. One is distributed maritime operation. The other is expeditionary advanced base operation, meaning use these little islands as their advanced bases to direct missiles and major fleets. If they continue to push this strategy, DMO and the EABO, then we are in real bad danger because we are in the middle of the first island chain. In the 1850s to 70s, that's what America wanted to do. Seize Taiwan so that you can control the 7 provinces in the southeast part of China. And also you control the entry into the Okinawa Trout, you control the entry to the Taiwan Strait and the Bashi Strait. So all the major choke points can be secured in the US sense if they continue to have a very strong presence of military control in Taiwan, and they can then fend off mainland China. If that were really the US grand strategy, then Taiwan is doomed to be a flashpoint because mainland China will not allow such a strong military presence of the United States in an island so close to mainland China, just as the United States wouldn't want Cuba to be used by the Soviet Union for their missile base. It's the same analogy, and it shouldn't repeat itself again.
Absolutely, and brilliantly put. I completely, totally concur. And how easy it would be to avoid conflict. The United States does not have to put its nose inside China's tent, inside China's business. The Soviet Union didn't have to put its missile systems in Cuba. Not a good idea. It nearly brought us to nuclear annihilation. I strongly advise Russia and China don't put military bases on the Rio Grande in Mexico, even if the Mexican government asks for it. Don't do it. It's not a good idea. If the United States has any sense at all, any sense of prudence at all, which is unfortunately doubtful, don't get into the middle of this because you want peace, don't provoke. And from what Joanna said about the US claiming how crucial the sea lanes are, yeah, they're crucial for China. China's not going to allow these choke points designed and declared by the United States. You read them in US documents. We have choke points on China. China's not going to sit there and let itself be choked to death economically or in the flow of food imports or energy imports. But why would there be a conflict? Only if we provoke a conflict. The waterways will remain open unless we provoke them to be closed. And the idea that we must provoke because otherwise China will take over the world is First of all, it's a projection because it's the US that wants to run the world, sorry to say, not China. China never in its 2,225-year history since unification has ever tried to run the world. But it's the US that makes this projection. But this is an absurdity. Nobody can run the world across the oceans, across the vast spaces. China's no threat to the United States. China is no threat militarily to the United States unless we have a nuclear war with each other. Are we crazy? So if we just have a little bit of prudence, we'll stay out of each other's way. And this is what I say to my friend John Mearsheimer, just keep a space between the powers, and then we can avoid nuclear Armageddon. Just a little space, a little prudence. But again, it's so important for the Taiwanese people. Just please be careful. Don't listen to the US on this. Are you kidding? Look at a map. Be sensible. Be grown up. Make a consensus across the straits and say to your US friends, please be careful, but we're okay. We're okay. Please don't provoke us into fighting with our next door neighbor.
Let me just add, when I went to Germany and talked to the sort of economic elites there, they expected me to say, oh, we are so terrified by this big bad wolf next door. Please come and help us. And they were extremely surprised by the fact that I told them we were entirely capable of dealing with our own matters. Just don't meddle us. We can and we have 8 years of direct negotiation between government agencies and signed agreements. They were totally shocked. They thought we were there to ask for help, much like Zelensky did. Help us defend your democracy and defend the Western civilization. They expected me to say that. But I think it's important for people like Jeffrey and Pascal that you have a voice. You can let people know that we can, and we have been able to deal with our situation. And don't just listen to the current ruling party because they represent less than 30% of the population. But they have, because of our inadequate system, they have the huge voice internationally. And the other silent cries are not heard. And furthermore, if Biden did something in his judgment was the best for the country, Trump said US and China can solve a lot of problems, whether he means it or not mean it. But it is true. China has developed a great EV industry, very good zero carbon kind of initiatives. It's strong in space and deep space. It's doing quantum computing, AI. All these things can help us resolve our issues as human beings and can save humanities and not just a nuclear Armageddon like Jeff was saying. And it is important to have the United States turning its head to look at China in a different way as a potential partner to solve issues of the world. And the only time I saw that happening was in those disaster movies, 2012 and all these others, when you have foreign invasion or aliens coming down to the Earth. United States will work with other powers. But we are at that brink already. We have so many problems that we cannot resolve. Human beings and humanities are at risk. So why not let the powers resolve their small little perspective issues and work in concert to help the rest of us?
Very last question, and then I will let both of you go. 2 minutes each. We start with Joanna. Do you see any hope in the new system that we are seeing, the new multipolarity, maybe through BRICS to actually change something in the dynamic? Please, Joanna.
I was working in development as well, like Jeffrey's earlier time. So I'm very excited about BRICS and the Global South to have an ability to build on the basis of real economy and not just finance, on the real economy and build their own wish and dreams. So I'm extremely hopeful. Now we know another 9 countries have joined the BRICS as the partners, and there will be an opportunity to even in terms of the currencies and exchange systems, collaborations, infrastructures, all of these will be the hope and dream and bring these hopes and dreams to people in the global south. So I'm very excited about that.
Jeffrey, your
And
take?
yes, we have, and we should applaud a true multipolar, multilateral world. The world does not want a hegemon. The world does not want one leader. The world does not look to the United States or anyone else as the indispensable country or the sole superpower. It can't happen. It's not real. It's a comic book fiction for the United States to think that it is that. It is also a comic book nightmare for the United States to think China's going to run the world. We're going to have a multipolar world. The question is, can we survive and live and prosper in that world? And the answer is yes, if we understand to respect each other, to stay out of each other's red lines, to understand what common security is rather than one's own claim of security at the expense of others, to stop pointing our missile systems at each other, and to get on with the business of solving problems. This is all possible. The BRICS can be an important, positive part of that step. And if we are sensible, this is the direction we'll go.
Joanna Lei, Jeffrey Sachs, thank you very much.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.